A woman is found dead in her car, her body slumped over the wheel, blood soaking through her clothes. At first glance, it looks like a robbery turned deadly, but something doesn't add up. The scene is too controlled, the execution too precise. This wasn't random. This was personal. What if the person sworn to protect you was the one who wanted you dead? Vickie McLain was a woman who had spent her life balancing her responsibilities as a wife, a mother, and a working professional. She was known for her warmth, her infectious laughter, and the way she could light up a room without even trying. She had a strong personality, independent, determined, and confident, the kind of woman who spoke her mind, but also had a softness that made people feel at ease around her. She'd been married for years, her life appearing stable from the outside. She and her husband had built a home together, and though like any couple they had their struggles, there was no indication that Vickie was actively seeking a way out until she met someone who made her rethink everything. That man was Deputy Charles Ray Stewart. They met under circumstances that at first seemed harmless. Maybe it was at the local sheriff's office, maybe through mutual acquaintances. But what started as friendly conversation quickly turned into something more. Charles was older, a man with authority and presence. He knew how to command attention, how to make someone feel important when he focused on them. It wasn't long before Vickie found herself drawn to him in ways she hadn't expected. Their relationship wasn't just an affair. It was intense. The kind of connection that was built on whispered conversations, short-lasting moments, and the thrill of secrecy. Charles had a way of making her feel special, like she was the only person who truly understood him. And for a while, she believed that. But there were things about Charles that made the relationship difficult, things that should have been warning signs. He was possessive. At first, it was small things, wanting to know where she was, who she was with. He would check in constantly, under the guise of caring. But over time, it became more. He wanted control. He wanted to dictate when they saw each other, at how much time she spent with him. He would question her when she was distant, making her feel guilty for pulling away. Vickie was caught in something she wasn't sure how to escape. The secrecy of their affair meant she had no one to talk to about the pressure she felt, the way Charles seemed to be tightening his grip on her life. Maybe she convinced herself it wasn't as bad as it seemed. Maybe she thought she could handle it, until she couldn't anymore. At some point, Vickie made the decision that she wanted out. She wanted to rebuild her life, to focus on her family, to move forward without the weight of the affair hanging over her. She must have known it wouldn't be easy. She must have known that Charles wouldn't take it well. And he didn't. To him, Vickie wasn't just a lover. She was his. And the idea of losing her wasn't something he was willing to accept. He didn't see this as just an affair that had run its course. He saw it as a betrayal, an insult, a rejection he refused to tolerate. There was no reasoning with him, no way to make him understand that she needed to leave. He made it clear that if she thought she could walk away, she was wrong. She was his. And if he couldn't have her, no one would. What happened next would prove just how far he was willing to go to make sure Vickie never left him. Charles Ray Stewart wore a badge, a uniform, and carried a gun. Not just as tools of the job, but as symbols of authority. He had spent years in law enforcement, earning a reputation that was complicated. To some, he was a dependable officer, a man who knew the law inside and out. He had a way of commanding respect, the kind of presence that made people listen when he spoke. But respect isn't the same as trust. And those who worked closely with him knew there was something else beneath the surface. Stewart had always been a man who liked control. In his career, that made him effective. He didn't second-guess himself. He followed procedure, and when he gave orders, he expected them to be followed without hesitation. He was the type of officer who prided himself on knowing everything that happened in his jurisdiction. That made him good at his job, but it also made him dangerous in ways people didn't realize until it was too late. There were red flags, but they were easy to overlook. Stewart knew how to mask his temper, how to keep his emotions just below the surface. When he got frustrated, it wasn't through outbursts. It was through silence, through the way his mood would shift, the way his presence could change the energy in a room. Some people avoided crossing him, not because he was violent, but because there was something about him that made confrontation feel risky. But there were signs. There were officers who had seen him react too strongly in certain situations, who had watched him handle disputes with a level of aggression that felt unnecessary. And then there were the stories, the ones people whispered about how he handled people who disrespected him. He didn't let things go. If someone challenged him, they didn't just walk away from it. He had a way of making sure they knew he was in charge, one way or another. Outside of work, he wasn't much different. Those closest to him would say he had a way of getting under people's skin, of making himself a presence in their lives, whether they wanted him there or not. He wasn't the kind of man to accept rejection. He took offense easily, and when he didn't forget it. So when Vickie McLain told him it was over, he didn't take it like most men would. She wasn't just walking away from an affair, she was walking away from him, and that, in his mind, wasn't an option. At first, it was just words. He told her she was making a mistake, that she didn't understand what she was doing. He played on their history, on the emotions that had kept them together for so long. He reminded her of everything they had shared, everything he had done for her. He acted like this was just a phase, something she would regret once she had time to think. But Vickie wasn't changing her mind, and that was when Stewart changed his approach. He started showing up when she didn't expect him, at work, at places where he knew she would be. He found excuses to call, reasons to keep the conversation going, even when she made it clear she was done. Then the questions started. Who was she spending time with? Why wasn't she answering his calls? Was there someone else? He was an investigator, trained to notice details, to piece together information, and now all of that focus, all of that intensity was turned onto her. He watched her closely, listened carefully to everything she said, every excuse she made. And she noticed. She felt his presence even when he wasn't around, the way people do when they know someone is watching them. She changed her routine, avoided certain places, tried to make it harder for him to find her. But Stewart wasn't the kind of man to let go that easily. Did she tell anyone? Maybe. Maybe she confided in a close friend, mentioned that she felt uneasy, that Stewart wasn't taking things well. Maybe she thought about going to the police, but what could she say? That a deputy, someone who worked alongside them, was making her uncomfortable? Stewart had power, influence, and that made him even more dangerous. To him, this wasn't just a breakup. It was an act of defiance. He had given her everything, and now she was throwing it away. And as far as he was concerned, that meant she had to pay for it. What happened next was not an impulsive act. It wasn't a moment of lost control. It was planned. Every detail, every decision, and when the time came, there was no hesitation. It was late in the evening when Vickie McLain left work for the last time. The day had been like any other, conversations with coworkers, plans made for the following week, the kind of routine that made it seem like nothing was wrong. If she was worried, if she felt the weight of something pressing down on her, she didn't let it show. She walked to her car, keys in hand, ready to go home, but she never made it. She didn't see him waiting. Charles Ray Stewart knew exactly where she would be. He had been tracking her movements for weeks, paying attention to her habits, learning her schedule in ways she never noticed. He wasn't going to leave anything to chance. This wasn't something he was going to do in the heat of the moment. It had to be done right. It had to be clean. As Vickie reached for the door handle, the first shot rang out. The bullet struck her in the chest, shattering the illusion of safety she had been living in. There was no time to react, no chance to run. The second shot came fast, silencing any chance of a scream. She collapsed, slumping against the car, blood pooling beneath her as her body went still. And then, silence. For a moment, nothing moved. No one screamed. No one came rushing to help. Just the sound of wind rustling through the parking lot, the faint hum of distant traffic, and the weight of what had just happened settling in the air. Stewart had done his job. Now he had to cover it up. He had thought about this part long before he pulled the trigger. It had to look random, like a robbery gone wrong. He yanked her purse from the passenger seat and tossed it into the darkness, far enough away to suggest a thief in a hurry. He reached inside the car, pulling at the contents, scattering papers, flipping open the glove compartment. making it look like someone had been searching for valuables. Then he hesitated. A good officer knew the details that made or broke an investigation. He had worked crime scenes before. He had seen killers make mistakes, things as small as an undisturbed coffee cup, a locked car door when it should have been open. He had to think. Every movement had to be calculated. He cracked the driver's side window just enough. Just enough to make it look like Vickie had been caught off guard, but not enough to suggest a struggle. He left the car door slightly ajar, knowing that real robbers rarely close doors behind them. Then he stepped back, took a final look. It had to be convincing, and it almost was. But when the police arrived, things didn't sit right. At first glance, the scene had all the makings of a random attack. Late at night, an open car, missing belongings. But something was missing. Something about it felt too neat, too staged. Detectives noticed the purse right away. It was too far from the car, as if someone had deliberately thrown it rather than dropped it in a rush. The contents were still inside: credit cards, ID, cash. A thief wouldn't have left those behind. Then there was the way she had been shot. 2 precise gunshots. Not wild, not rushed. These weren't the erratic wounds of someone caught in the panic of a crime. They were measured, intentional. A robbery gone wrong usually had signs of struggle, hesitation, chaos. This was different. Then there was the car itself. The driver's side window was down just enough, but not enough to be natural. If someone had been forcing her to comply, why not all the way? If she had been reaching for something, why only that small gap? And then came the first real mistake. No tire marks, no signs of a car speeding away, no footprints leading in different directions, just the scene itself, as if whoever had done this had all the time in the world. Vickie had been targeted. It didn't take long for suspicions to start forming. And once the police started looking at who she knew, who she had been involved with, one name stood out: Charles Ray Stewart. His name surfaced quickly. He wasn't just a passing acquaintance. He had been deeply involved with Vickie, and more importantly, he had a reason to be angry with her. She had been trying to leave him. The next step was verifying his whereabouts. When Stewart was questioned, he kept his answers direct, unemotional. He had an alibi. He had been at home, alone. He hadn't spoken to Vickie that night. He didn't know anything about what had happened to her. He played the role of a concerned friend, expressing shock that anyone would want to hurt her. But Stewart underestimated how thorough investigations could be. The first crack in his alibi came from Vickie's phone records. Her call log showed a number of recent interactions with Stewart in the days leading up to her death. And then something interesting. Calls that night. The timestamps didn't match his story. Security footage from businesses near the parking lot provided another piece of the puzzle. A vehicle similar to Stewart's had been seen in the area not long before the shooting. It wasn't enough to prove anything, yet, but it placed him closer than he claimed to be. Then came the witness statements. A woman who had been parked a few rows away recalled seeing someone near Vickie's car shortly before the gunshots. She hadn't seen the attack itself, but she remembered something specific. The man she saw wasn't running afterward. He wasn't panicked. He was walking away calmly, as if he had just finished what he came there to do. The evidence started piling up, but it wasn't enough for an arrest. Detectives needed something undeniable. And they got it. Gunshot residue. A forensic sweep of Stewart's uniform and personal belongings revealed traces of gunshot residue, small particles that are released when a firearm is discharged. It wasn't just on his clothes, it was on the inside of his car. It was the moment of truth. When detectives confronted him, Stewart stuck to his story. He denied everything. He called the evidence circumstantial. He claimed the residue could have come from his job, from handling his service weapon. He insisted the calls were nothing unusual, just an attempt to check in with Vickie, but the walls were closing in. Investigators presented him with the contradictions, the footage, the phone records, the forensic findings. Piece by piece, the story he had carefully constructed started falling apart. And then, finally, came the moment when Stewart realized there was no way out. His face changed. The confidence drained from his expression. He wasn't in control anymore. But even then, he didn't confess. He didn't admit to anything. Instead, he did the only thing he had left. He stayed silent. Detectives had seen it before. A man who had spent his career in law enforcement knew that words could be dangerous, so he stopped talking. But by then, it didn't matter. The truth had already caught up to him. By the time Charles Ray Stewart was brought to trial, the weight of the evidence against him was impossible to ignore. Prosecutors were confident. They didn't just have circumstantial proof, they had forensics, phone records, witness testimony, and motive. Stewart was charged with first-degree murder. The prosecution painted a clear picture. This was not a crime of passion. It wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It was a deliberate, premeditated killing carried out by a man who refused to accept rejection. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, former colleagues, and members of the community filled the benches. Some came for justice, others out of curiosity, but no one could look away from the man who once upheld the law and now stood accused of breaking it in the worst way possible. The first witnesses called were forensic experts. A ballistics specialist testified that the bullets recovered from Vickie McLain's body matched a weapon commonly used by law enforcement. While Stewart's personal firearm was never found to be the murder weapon, the caliber and pattern of fire were consistent with someone trained to shoot efficiently. A gunshot residue analyst took the stand next, explaining in meticulous detail how microscopic particles found on Stewart's clothes and inside his car were proof that he had fired a weapon that night. The phone records expert followed, mapping out the calls between Stewart and Vickie in the hours leading up to her murder. The jury listened as the prosecution demonstrated that Stewart had been nowhere near his home, contradicting his alibi. Then came the witnesses who had spoken earlier. The woman from the parking lot who recounted that she saw a man leaving the crime scene, walking away instead of running. She described his build, his posture, and the calmness in his movements, details that made it harder for Stewart's defense to argue that this was the act of an unknown robber. One of the most critical testimonies came from a former colleague of Stewart's, a fellow deputy who had known him for years. Under oath, he described how Stewart had spoken about Vickie in the weeks leading up to her death. He admitted that Stewart had been angry and obsessed with her decision to end things. He recalled conversations where Stewart had made chilling remarks, statements that at the time seemed like frustration, but now read like threats. The defense tried to argue that there was no direct evidence linking Stewart to the murder. They claimed the forensic evidence could have been the result of contamination, that the witness testimony was subjective, that Stewart was being unfairly judged because of his past relationship with Vickie. But the prosecution didn't need a confession. They had built their case piece by piece, and when they finally rested, the weight of the evidence was undeniable. Throughout the trial, Stewart showed no emotion. He sat stiffly at the defense table, listening without reaction as witnesses recounted his lies, his mistakes, and the moments that led to his arrest. He never took the stand in his own defense. His attorneys knew better. There was nothing he could say that wouldn't make it worse. When the jury was sent to deliberate, the courtroom was tense. Hours passed, then a day, and finally, after 2 days of deliberation, they returned with their decision. Guilty. The judge wasted no time in sentencing. Charles Ray Stewart was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He had spent his career walking into courtrooms as an officer of the law. Now, he was led out of one in handcuffs. The impact on Vickie's family was immeasurable. Her loved ones had sat through every painful detail of the trial, hearing things they wished they could forget. Her mother, who had once worried about her daughter but never imagined this outcome. Her friends, who had seen the warning signs but never thought it would come to this. When the verdict was read, some wept quietly. Others simply nodded as if justice had finally been served. But no sentence could bring Vickie back. No punishment could erase the fear she had felt in her final moments, the betrayal of trusting someone who ultimately saw her as disposable. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered, cameras flashing as Stewart was escorted into a transport van, heading toward a future behind bars. For the McLain family, it wasn't closure. It was just the end of one chapter of their grief. The murder of Vickie McLain wasn't just another crime. It wasn't a random act of violence. It was something extremely disturbing, a calculated killing carried out by someone who was supposed to protect the very laws he broke. When news of Charles Ray Stewart's arrest spread, the community was shaken. People who had once trusted him as a law enforcement officer now had to reconcile the fact that he had used that same position of authority to manipulate and control. Colleagues who had worked alongside him, who had responded to calls with him, who had trusted him with their lives in dangerous situations, now they had to accept that one of their own was a murderer. For the people closest to Vickie, the shock came with guilt. Had they missed the signs? Had she been afraid in ways she never fully expressed? Would anything have changed if someone had stepped in earlier? Because the truth is, there were signs. Charles Stewart wasn't a man who simply snapped one day. He had a pattern: possessiveness, manipulation, control. He believed that because he was in law enforcement, because he had power, he could get away with anything. And for a while, he did. But this case proved something important. No one is above the law. Unchecked power is dangerous. Obsession, when left unchallenged, is dangerous. The people we trust the most, the ones we turn to for protection, for justice, for guidance, can also be the ones who hide the most dangerous intentions. Vickie McLain lost her life because she tried to take control of her own. She walked away from a man who refused to accept that he wasn't in control. She made a choice to reclaim her future, and for that, she was murdered. But cases like this force us to ask uncomfortable questions. How many people out there are trapped in situations like Vickie's? How many are afraid to leave because they don't know what will happen if they do? How often do we ignore subtle warning signs, brushed off threats, possessive behavior, that uneasy feeling in the pit of our stomachs, until it's too late? Let's talk about it. Do you think there were warning signs that could have stopped this? Could anything have changed the outcome? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this case as fascinating as it is tragic, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. We cover real cases like this every week, bringing you true crime stories that need to be told. Next time, we take a closer look at another shocking case, a story of deception, betrayal, and the ultimate price of trust. Make sure to hit the notification bell so you don't miss it. Because in the world of true crime, the most disturbing stories are often the ones that feel the closest to home.